me to legally register the sister company in Senegal.
Right. So let's just focus on that for a minute. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're comparing 20 minutes to 2 years. Mm-hmm. Right. So then you have to ask yourself, and I'm sure you have, is how much time and energy do people have? Like, it's not an easy thing to set up a business. It's a daring thing, and there's a tremendous amount of risk involved, and you'll probably fail. That's the risk side of it. Now, you might succeed beyond your wildest dreams, but if you exhaust all your hardworking and entrepreneurial people by forcing them to jump through idiot hoops nonstop, all that you do is keep people absolutely impoverished. And so we've got a key issue with regard to poverty right here, which is the presence of a stunning amount of unnecessary red tape. So how is it, do you think, that the US has managed to make it so that you can register a company in 20 minutes, whereas in Senegal, it takes 2 years? And, you know, I read a great book called The Mystery of Capital, Hernando de Soto.
De Soto, I was going to bring him up.
Yeah, De Soto's great, man. That's a great book.
Yes.
And he points out that in some of the so-called developing countries, especially the more corrupt ones, not only does it take multiple years to do anything at all legally, but by the time you jump through all the hoops to do it legally, the laws have been changed so that what you do is no longer valid.
That is absolutely the case. So you're asking me a very good question. And the way I will go about that is I'm going to try to take this opportunity to debunk a myth. Because this whole conversation with you, I take it as my opportunity to debunk so many myths about African poverty. Hence, what would it take for to build African prosperity? Because I'm not interested in alleviating poverty. I'm not interested in just like, oh, can I be a little bit less poor? No, I want to be prosperous. I think my people, like anybody else, should be prosperous. So,
yes, and we should also let's point out very clearly, since we're debunking myths, that that's actually a high ethical aim, is that we want life more abundant for everyone. We don't want to limp along, lowering our carbon footprint, barely scraping the surface. We want people to be prosperous and free and life to be abundant and everyone to have enough educational resources and to thrive. And that's the ethical aim. That's right, to thrive.
To thrive. Human flourishing. To me, it starts and it ends with it. Human flourishing. Now, what it means for somebody to flourish, it's going to be up to them to decide. But should everybody have access to human flourishing? You betcha. So here, going back to the question and why the US and in Africa not, and then Hernando de Soto making the case that oftentimes corrupt countries make it so hard. So there, the myth that I debunk is so often, you know, I talk to people and they're like, oh, Africa, these countries, this region is so corrupt. And I'm like, yes, my country might be corrupt, almost as bad as Chicago. You know what I mean by that. So corruption is, if you will, everywhere. But the way it manifests itself is different from place to place. And so I would like to argue on the order and the relationship between corruption and these laws that Hernando de Soto was talking about. The more they corrupt and the more you have to jump through hoops and everything. I like to argue that corruption is a cause of senseless laws, is a cause, too many laws, and also senseless laws. When you have those together, then you breed corruption. Give you an example. This is another example that we had to go through. My current company is a skincare company, Skin is Skin. So for that, we have to import some ingredients, because if you don't have you need the inputs that you need at the standard of quality that you need them in order to remain competitive in your marketplace. My marketplace is the United States. That's where the people have the money to spend all of this, to spend on our products. They understand our products. This is just, it's one of the best markets for us for many different reasons. We sell at places like Whole Foods Market. I don't have to tell you, it's one of the most beautiful chain of grocery stores in the US. You can imagine that the buyers are super sophisticated and they don't just bring any product in that chain, but they bring us. So, which tells you the level of standard we're playing at with world class. So, it means that everything behind the scene has to be world-class. The whole chain, up and down, has to be world-class. And so ingredients, no different. So we have to bring in some ingredients. Well, guess what, Jordan? For some of my ingredients, the tariff is 45% to enter the country, 45%. Others, almost 70%. How do you expect me to be competitive if you're slapping such tariff on some of my inputs? How? Because for every 50 cents you add on tariffs, I have to sell my products $2 more than I would have in order for me to actually make it. I become very uncompetitive very quickly, quality for quality, product for product. So there we had to, so now, if instead of making it a 45%, how about maybe it's a 0% like it is in the US? If I had to bring the same product here in the US, 0% tariff on it. Or make it 5% or 2%, 3%, something that makes sense. So then do you really think that I'm going to try to jump through the hoops of avoiding that 45% or that 70%? There's no need. Pay it and move on because you've got better things to do. Mm-hmm. See how bad laws and senseless laws breed corruption because people will then, it is cheaper and faster for people to pay the bribe and move on than to adhere to the law. You see? So that's what we have inherited in most African nations. As I noticed, the discrepancy and the difference between doing business back home and doing business in the United States. At first, I was like, oh, well, of course it's like this. It's just because, we're a poor nation, we're messed up, and that's why everything else is messed up. And then eventually, I started to really think about it, to think it through. And it's around the same time that God, again, brought some interesting people in my life. Because at that time, my company, my first company at least, was, now I had moved into the nonprofit. We had started a nonprofit because my goal was, how can I help replicate whatever success I was able to have? How can I help many other Magattes or my male counterparts from Africa do exactly what I did with whatever product they deemed to do it with? How could I help with that? And it is during that journey that I eventually even learned about the work of Hernando de Soto. And when I heard about his work, he was right there telling me, Magatte, what you went through, what you're going through, experientially speaking, is not an anecdote. This is something very systemic about this. And it is called economic freedom. How easy or hard it is to do a business. You have indexes that measure this. The most known of them being the Doing Business Index ranking of the World Bank. And then you have a Fraser Institute Economic Freedom Index as well, and others and others. Well, what do they all have in common? They all show you one after the other that it is harder to do business in anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa than it is anywhere in Scandinavia. And I take Scandinavia purposely because people who are anti-business, they need to know that Scandinavia is more business friendly, is more pro-capitalist, I'll use the dirty word, than almost any sub-Saharan African nation. And
Right, and so the Scandinavian choice is a very interesting one because the rabid and idiot anti-capitalists of the West often point to Scandinavia as socialist countries. But as you point out, they're socialist on the edges and capitalist at the core and in a very, very effective and efficient manner. And so they are business friendly in precisely the manner that you described. And those principles that you elucidated, minimum necessary laws, that's part of the English common law tradition. Yep. Minimum necessary force of enforcement, that's another good one.
Yep.
And what is it?
Clear,
I think this was Montaigne.
And you also have clear and transferable property rights. And you also have the concept of a rule of law as well.
Right. So those are some of the metaphysical and legislative substrates that make a free enterprise system possible. Because people often also think about only the market working, but you need a set of regulations and also customs that the free market can run on top of, like an operating system.
Exactly. And I love that you're using the word operating system because this is going to take us to something else. But before we go any further, there I want to point that as I was learning from the work of people like Hernando de Soto, as I was learning from people like the man who became my husband, I like to joke and say, he brought me the answer to my little girl's question. I rewarded him with love, so I married him. As I was looking at the work of people like him, Michael Strong, people like John Mackey of Whole Foods Market, they're friends, so that's how I got to know John. But they made me really get into a whole nother world of people who truly care. But what was different about these people is that they cared not on their own terms. They cared, but on the terms of the truth. And we might go into that at some point, but let me just keep it there. So what happened in that time of my life, as I was trying to see how can I multiply my whatever success, I found out the answer. I started to connect the dots, and I learned that eventually, wow. So you're poor because you have no money because no source of income. A source of income for most of us is a job. Where do jobs come from? The private sector, businesses, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. Then shouldn't we think about the environment of those businesses in which they get to thrive or not? I think we do. But then when I